If you're watching this video, you're probably intrigued as to how to start out as a sports photographer. Now, I myself started just over a year ago in football, and today I'm going to go through the whole journey, step by step, everything that I did and you need to do to start out as a sports photographer. Now, today I'm going to go through a couple different categories. We're going to start off with equipment, and then we'll speak in depth about the different settings to use on the camera. We'll then go through the editing process, and then finally we'll touch on the networking side of things and building those connections that you need to help you grow. Now, which sport should you start shooting? The number one thing I will say is pick a sport that you know very well, preferably a sport that you've played in the past or you've watched a lot of in the past. What this will do is it'll give you a head start, in contrast to if you're shooting a sport that was completely new to you. You'll know where the players are going to be, where the phases of play will usually lead up to, and generally the shots that those players will use on social media or the clubs will look out for when recruiting a new sports photographer. Sports photography is generally all about creating your own luck, being in the right position to get that shot, and just giving yourself as much of an edge over those other photographers as you can at that event by being in the perfect spot. Now, moving on to equipment. So when you first start out, equipment is not a massive issue at all whatsoever. When you first start, myself included, you want the best camera you can, the best lens you can, and by all means do that. However, if you don't have the budget to get those big flashy cameras and the massive lenses that you see the photographers using at those big events, don't worry. 9 times out of 10, someone starting photography won't have the best kit. Those first few months are all about mastering the settings on the camera that you do have and getting a feel for the whole photography base. Now, if you're on a low budget, like we're talking below £500, I'd 100% say just get a basic camera. Usually I'd go Canon if it was the first camera, but that is just personal preference, with a 75 to 350mm lens. Now, these have variable apertures, which we'll touch on a bit later, so it can make things a bit more difficult. However, when you're first starting, it has the range that you'll need for majority of sports, and 9 times out of 10 you can get them in a bundle with a basic camera body for a fairly decent price, and 100% buy used. Now, any equipment that I buy off of MPB, just because I've used them so much in the past and they've never really let me down. Now, if you're on a bit of a bigger budget, I'd say £1,000 plus. Get a 70 to 200mm f2.8 lens for whatever camera body you want to use, and then the money that you have left over, spend that on the camera body. 70 to 200mm is kind of a given in like 99% of sports, even at the top level. So it's a lens that you'll have with you for years to come, and it can do indoor and outdoor sports pretty easily, have a decent range, and it can cover you whether you're doing close range celebrations or you're doing those shots more in the middle of the pitch or the court. Now, settings, this is where it gets a bit fiddly, and this is where people often go wrong, just putting it on automatic mode, letting the camera do the work and not actually learning. Now, I did the exact same because it all just looked so daunting to me. However, this did then hurt me in the long run because at some point you need to learn manual. It sounds scary and it looks scary, but trust me, it's really not. Once you get the basics down and you start to master them, it all becomes really easy and you will definitely see the difference in your shots. Setting number 1, shutter speed. Now, this is effectively how quick the shutter in your camera closes and opens. Pretty self-explanatory. The lower the shutter speed, the longer it will take for the shutter to close and open, meaning the blurrier the image. The higher the shutter speed means the quicker the shutter will close and open, therefore leading to a more sharper and less blurry image. If you're doing football, which is what I primarily do, or you're doing kind of like a rugby or something, depending on the weather, I'll usually range between 1 to 800 and 1 to 2000. You can go a little bit higher than that if you need to. It's not a massive issue if it's really, really sunny. However, going below 1 to 800 will usually lead to blurrier pictures, and sometimes even on 1 to 800, the ball can get a bit blurry. So I'll usually only tend to go down to that if it's on a night game, and with it being non-league floodlights, the lighting is pretty poor. ISO, a pretty self-explanatory one again. ISO is basically how bright and grainy your picture is. The lower the ISO, the darker and less grainy it is. The higher the ISO, the brighter and more grainy it is. Now, grain is the little black spots you'll see on a lot of different photographers' posts. As a general rule of thumb, you want to keep that ISO down as low as you can, whilst also keeping your shutter speed in that sweet spot. Moving on to aperture. Aperture is that number next to the F that you'll see, and that is effectively how wide or how closed your lens is. Now, the wider it is, so the bigger number, the more light it will let in. The lower it is and the more closed it is, the less light it will let in. This can affect the blurriness in the background, but it mainly affects how low you can bring the ISO and shutter speed. So at a non-league football game, for example, where the light's really poor, you don't want to be really above f2.8 if you can. Anything above that, you're really going to struggle, and those photos are going to come out really grainy because you're going to be on 15,000 ISO or above. Generally with sports photography lenses, if they're a fixed aperture, so say you have a 70 to 200mm f2.8 lens and you're shooting in the daytime, so you can adjust the aperture, usually I'd say go up 1 or 2 clicks just because it makes the photo more sharper. Now white balance, this is effectively the temperature of your photo. This isn't too important, as if you're shooting in RAW format, then you can adjust this in Lightroom really easily, no matter what you had your white balance set to. However, if you're shooting in JPEG, white balance is extremely important, as you can't really change this in Lightroom without spending hours and hours and hours on each individual photo. Now, a lot of people just put it onto auto white balance, which is absolutely fine. You can do that, the setting's there for a reason. However, when you do this, it will change throughout all the photos that you're taking, and you'll have inconsistent photos in your last album unless you're going to go through every individual one and adjust it in the raw photo. So to speed things up, what I usually do is I carry around a white piece of card with me, and I will stick that on the floor and I'll just point my camera at it, get it in focus, and you then adjust the white balance in your camera settings until that white card looks perfectly white. Once you've got that, effectively your white balance is spot on perfect, and you shouldn't, unless the light is changing in the conditions that you're at, you shouldn't then need to change it at all throughout the whole shoot. Now, on that note, moving on to editing. This can literally be the make or break of your photos. You can have a pretty poor photo and you can edit it to look really nice if you're good at Lightroom. Now, before you even put it into Lightroom though, you want to go through all of your photos and you want to select which photos you want to shortlist down to edit. Now, you can do this in Lightroom, however, I find it a lot easier to use a software called Photo Mechanic. All you do, just take all your photos off the SD card into a folder on your laptop or your PC, stick them into Photo Mechanic, and all you've got to do is just go through, press 1 if you like the image, press nothing if you don't, and then filter it to the red tag, which is what it will give it when you press number 1, and then press download all, and then put them into Lightroom. Now, photography is completely personal, so editing, find your own style and go with it. Now, finally, networking. Networking and building connections with photographers in the scene can really boost the trajectory of your photography career. Anytime you're at an event, a sports game, anything at all, and there's another photographer there, always make sure to just come and say hi. I mean, most people are friendly. Compared to any other category of work that I've been in, photography is 100% the friendliest. Once you build them connections, feel free to ask people questions. As I say, most photographers are nice and friendly, and I mean, even the people at the top of the game do this. You can never stop learning. Now, that is everything that you need to know if you're starting out in sports photography. Like I say, I mean, myself, I've only been doing it a year and a half now. Before that, I had never even touched a camera, let alone done all the editing, the settings, anything like that. I was completely clueless. And a video like this is exactly what I would have needed to start.